Hello everyone. The heirloom he used to frame his wife. This fictional dramatization is for entertainment and does not provide legal advice. Do not leave before the elderly woman enters the courtroom, because one sentence from her will destroy the story her millionaire son spent months building. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments whether family loyalty should ever require silence when someone you love is doing wrong. Now listen closely, because the most valuable thing stolen that night was not a sapphire worth $2 million. It was the truth. The Whitmore Heritage Gala celebrated 50 years of a hotel empire built along the California coast. Photographs of the late Charles Whitmore covered the ballroom walls. Charles opening his first roadside inn. Charles greeting presidents. Charles standing beside his wife, Eleanor, as their company entered the stock market. At 74, Eleanor Whitmore sat beneath those photographs wearing a silver gown and no jewelry. Her son noticed. Ryan Whitmore, chairman of Whitmore Hospitality, paused in the middle of his speech and looked toward the family table. His pregnant wife, Emily Carter Whitmore, sat beside Eleanor. "Mother," Ryan said into the microphone, "where is the Whitmore star?" Conversation stopped. The Whitmore star was a sapphire brooch surrounded by diamonds. Charles had given it to Eleanor on their 25th wedding anniversary. It had appeared in family portraits for decades and was insured for nearly $2 million. Eleanor's hand moved toward the empty place near her shoulder. "It is in my safe." Ryan's expression changed slowly, as if concern had just become suspicion. "No," he said, "it is not." Two uniformed private security officers entered from a side door. Emily stood. At 7 months pregnant, she moved carefully. "Ryan, what are you doing?" He did not look at her. The safe was open this afternoon. Only 3 people had access. Eleanor's face tightened. "My house manager, my attorney, and me." Ryan turned toward the audience. A 4th access code was created last month. Emily felt hundreds of eyes move toward her. Ryan finally faced his wife. "Your code." "That is impossible." He lifted a printed page. "The security log says otherwise." Emily had helped Eleanor organize medications and medical appointments after a minor stroke. Ryan had insisted she receive temporary access to the Montecito residence in case of an emergency. She had never opened the jewelry safe. "Why are you doing this in public?" Emily asked. "Because the family deserves transparency." The irony struck several board members at once. Ryan's chief financial officer stepped onto the stage carrying a velvet box. It was empty. A security officer approached Emily. "Mrs. Whitmore, may we inspect your handbag?" "No," Eleanor said sharply. Ryan ignored his mother. If she has nothing to hide, there is no reason to refuse. Emily looked at the man she had married 4 years earlier. Ryan was handsome, polished, and skilled at making cruelty sound reasonable. In private, he had spent months telling Emily that pregnancy had made her forgetful. He corrected details she remembered accurately, denied conversations they had held, and moved documents before accusing her of misplacing them. Now he was performing the same technique for an audience. "I did not take your mother's brooch," Emily said. Ryan stepped closer, then explained the wire transfer. A screen behind the stage changed. A bank record appeared showing a payment of $400,000 to a private account bearing Emily's name. Emily stared at it. "I have never seen that account." "You planned to leave," Ryan said. "You needed money." A murmur spread through the ballroom. Emily felt her daughter move. She pressed one hand against her abdomen and tried to slow her breathing. Eleanor rose with the help of her cane. "My daughter-in-law is not a thief." Ryan's jaw tightened. "Mother, please sit down." "I said she is not a thief." Ryan lowered the microphone but did not lower his voice. "You are confused." Eleanor became perfectly still. The insult was quieter than the accusation against Emily, but everyone over 50 in the room understood its weight. Ryan was not merely disagreeing with his mother. He was using her age and recent stroke to erase her authority. A security officer reached toward Emily's handbag. Emily pulled it back. "Do not touch me." Ryan raised the microphone again. "Call the police." The ballroom erupted. Guests reached for phones. Eleanor tried to step around the table, but her cane caught against a chair. Emily moved quickly and steadied her. For 1 second, mother and daughter-in-law stood together while Ryan watched from the stage. Then Eleanor whispered, "The brooch is not missing." Emily turned. "What?" Eleanor's eyes filled with fear. "Ryan took it 3 weeks ago." The nearest phone captured every word. Ryan ordered the music to resume. Security moved between Eleanor and the guests. His attorney hurried toward the stage. But the story had already escaped his control. Emily was not arrested. The responding police officers refused to treat a projected bank record as proof of theft. They took statements, requested access to the original security data, and advised the parties not to disturb possible evidence. Ryan left the gala through a private exit. Emily left with Eleanor. In the back seat of a waiting car, the older woman reached into her evening bag and removed a small brass key. "Your husband believes this opens my safe deposit box," she said. Emily stared at it. "Does it?" "No. It opens a desk Charles built for me 40 years ago." "What is inside?" Eleanor looked back at the hotel bearing her family name. "Everything Ryan is afraid I still remember." The car took Emily and Eleanor to a small guest house on the edge of Eleanor's Montecito property. It was the only building Ryan did not control through the company's security system. Charles Whitmore had used it as a writing studio during the final years of his life. Inside, Eleanor locked the door, drew the curtains, and sat at an oak desk marked by decades of ink stains. "You should call your doctor," she told Emily. "I am not the one who nearly fell. You are carrying my granddaughter, and my son just accused you of a felony in front of 600 people." Emily called her obstetrician. She had no bleeding or persistent pain, and the baby was moving normally, but the doctor asked her to come in for evaluation. Eleanor insisted on going with her. At the hospital, fetal monitoring showed no immediate danger. Emily's blood pressure was elevated, so she remained under observation for several hours. Eleanor sat beside the bed and explained what had happened before the gala. 3 weeks earlier, Ryan had visited her home with documents he claimed were routine trust updates. Since the stroke, Eleanor sometimes needed more time to read, but her memory remained intact. Ryan had grown impatient when she asked questions. "He wanted me to sign away voting control of my shares," she said. "I refused." "What does that have to do with the brooch?" "The next day, it disappeared from my jewelry safe. Ryan told me he was having it cleaned for the gala. I believed him until I received a notice from a private lender." Eleanor opened her handbag and handed Emily a folded letter. The Whitmore Star had been pledged as collateral for a loan issued to a company called Pacific Meridian Holdings. Emily recognized the name. Ryan had mentioned Pacific Meridian during several late-night phone calls, always leaving the room when she entered. "Why did you not confront him?" "I did. He told me I had authorized the loan and forgotten." Emily looked at Eleanor. "He has been telling me I forget things too." "That is how he works," Eleanor said. "He makes one person doubt herself at a time. Then he tells everyone else she cannot be trusted." The brass key opened a hidden compartment in Charles's desk. Inside were copies of trust documents, board minutes, personal letters, and a small digital recorder. Eleanor had begun recording meetings after Ryan tried to persuade her physician that she lacked capacity to manage her affairs. California law required caution around private recordings, so Eleanor had not secretly taped conversations in circumstances where Ryan reasonably expected privacy. Instead, she had openly placed the recorder on the table during formal trust meetings and announced that she wanted an accurate record. Ryan had objected at first, then continued speaking after the recorder remained in plain view. One file captured him saying, "If mother signs the voting proxy, the bridge financing becomes irrelevant." Another voice, belonging to Whitmore Hospitality's chief financial officer, replied, "And if she refuses?" Ryan answered, "Then we prove she cannot manage her own affairs." Emily felt cold. The false bank account in her name suddenly made sense. Ryan needed 2 women discredited for 2 different reasons. Eleanor had to appear cognitively impaired. Emily had to appear dishonest and desperate to leave. Once both were publicly weakened, Ryan could control the family shares, the trust, and the story. At dawn, attorney Helen Brooks arrived at the hospital. Helen was 62, a former probate litigator with a reputation for representing older adults in complex financial abuse cases. Charles had trusted her years earlier, though Ryan had later moved the company's work to a larger firm. Helen listened without interrupting. She reviewed the lender notice, copied the trust documents, and asked Eleanor careful questions about dates, medications, and meetings. "I need you to understand what will happen next," Helen said. "Ryan will say Emily influenced you. He will say your stroke damaged your judgment. He may petition for control over your affairs. We cannot answer that with outrage. We answer it with medical evidence, independent records, and your own consistent decisions. Eleanor straightened. I am not asking anyone to pretend I am 25. Good, Helen said. The law does not require youth. It requires capacity for the decision being made. Helen arranged separate representation for Emily to avoid conflicts. Civil trial attorney Marcus Reed agreed to represent her in claims arising from the public accusation, the false financial documents, and the pattern of coercive conduct in her marriage. Helen would represent Eleanor concerning the trust, the pledged brooch, and suspected financial abuse. The lawyers coordinated but did not blur their duties. That morning, Eleanor requested an elder abuse restraining order and emergency protection against further financial interference. Her filing described the pledged jewelry, the pressure to transfer voting rights, and the attempt to portray her as incapable. The court issued temporary orders preserving the disputed assets and limiting Ryan's ability to act under question documents until a noticed hearing. Emily filed for a domestic violence restraining order based on intimidation, coercive control, financial manipulation, and Ryan's effort to have her publicly detained through false allegations. She also filed for legal separation and requested temporary financial orders so Ryan could not cut off medical insurance or empty joint accounts. None of those emergency proceedings decided whether Ryan had committed every alleged wrong. They stabilized the situation while evidence could be gathered. Ryan was served at his office 2 days later. He responded with a press release. My mother is being manipulated by individuals seeking access to the Whitmore fortune. My wife is facing serious questions about missing property and unexplained funds. I will protect my family and company through the proper legal process. Emily read the statement once. Then Marcus showed her the metadata from the false bank record displayed at the gala. It had not come from a bank. It had been created on a Whitmore hospitality computer 11 hours before Ryan's speech. The temporary hearings took place over the next 3 weeks. Eleanor's neurologist testified that the stroke had affected her balance and slowed her speech under fatigue, but standardized evaluations showed that she understood her assets, relationships, and choices. Ryan's lawyers produced an expert who had never examined her and suggested that subtle impairment could still exist. The judge refused to declare Eleanor incapacitated on speculation. After reviewing the loan notice, trust documents, and Ryan's recorded statements from formal meetings, the court continued temporary protections and prohibited transfers involving Eleanor's shares, jewelry, and trust property without independent approval. A professional fiduciary was appointed for a limited purpose, to inventory disputed assets and report to the court, not to replace Eleanor's decision-making. At Emily's hearing, Ryan denied creating the bank record. He said his staff had supplied it and that he believed it was genuine. He also claimed the gala confrontation reflected a legitimate attempt to protect his mother. Marcus presented the original event timeline. Ryan had approved the slide containing the false account. He had invited private security before speaking to Emily. He had refused Eleanor's request to stop. The court issued a 2-year domestic violence restraining order limiting Ryan's contact with Emily and barring him from using employees, security personnel, or public statements to intimidate her. Communication concerning the pregnancy and legal separation would pass through counsel. Ryan called both orders temporary victories for outside opportunists. Then the long work began. The police investigation into the brooch remained separate from the civil cases. Detectives obtained warrants and subpoenas through proper channels. The district attorney did not announce charges based on a viral video. Investigators followed the jewelry, the lender, and the documents. Meanwhile, Helen and Marcus filed civil complaints. Eleanor alleged financial elder abuse, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and conversion of her property. Emily alleged defamation, false light, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and financial abuse within the marriage. Because many facts overlapped, the court coordinated discovery while preserving each woman's distinct claims. Ryan and the company answered the complaints. They denied wrongdoing and blamed a former finance employee for unauthorized records. Discovery lasted 14 months. The first breakthrough came from the hotel's audiovisual contractor. The company had retained a copy of the presentation uploaded before the gala. Its system log showed that Ryan's executive assistant had transmitted the false bank slide from an account controlled by the chief financial officer. The assistant testified that Ryan reviewed the deck during a rehearsal and instructed her not to remove the slide. The second came from the private lender. Pacific Meridian Holdings had borrowed $12 million to cover losses on a failed luxury resort project in Baja California. Ryan personally guaranteed part of the debt, but the lender demanded additional collateral. The Whitmore star had been delivered with an appraisal and a certification bearing Eleanor's electronic signature. A document examiner concluded that the certification contained a copied image of Eleanor's signature, not a signature applied by her to that document. The lender's representative produced a video call in which Ryan stated that his mother had approved the transaction but was too tired to appear. No one had independently verified consent. The third breakthrough was hidden in plain sight. Emily's supposed private bank account had been opened using scanned identification from a family office file. The address belonged to an empty condominium owned by Whitmore Hospitality. A sequence of transfers entered and left the account within 48 hours, creating the appearance that Emily had received money. Every dollar ultimately returned to an entity controlled by the company's chief financial officer. Emily had not signed the account documents. She had never logged in. The phone number attached to the account belonged to a prepaid device purchased by a Whitmore security employee. Ryan's lawyers argued that the chief financial officer, Thomas Vale, had acted alone. Then Thomas requested a meeting with federal investigators and separate counsel. Under oath in a civil deposition, with criminal counsel present, Thomas invoked his right not to answer certain questions. But corporate emails and calendar entries spoke where he would not. One message from Ryan read, "We need a clean reason for Emily to disappear from the foundation before Mother's proxy becomes public." Another said, "Use the gala. People believe what they see first." Eleanor listened to the deposition excerpts in Helen's office. "My son learned that from his father," she said quietly. Helen looked surprised. "Charles did this." "No. Charles used to say that hospitality means the guest's first impression becomes the truth they carry home." Ryan took a lesson about service and turned it into a weapon. The litigation cost Ryan professionally. Independent directors placed him on leave. Shareholders demanded an outside review. The board did not immediately declare him guilty, but it removed his access to disputed accounts and preserved company records. Ryan tried a different strategy. He wrote Eleanor a letter recalling childhood summers, Charles's funeral, and the day she handed him his first hotel key. He apologized for the confusion, but not for the acts. He asked her to end the lawsuit before the family name was permanently damaged. Eleanor read the letter at her kitchen table. Emily, now holding her newborn daughter, sat across from her. The baby had arrived healthy after an uncomplicated delivery. Emily named her Caroline Eleanor. "Do you want to stop?" Emily asked. Eleanor folded the letter. "I want my son to stop becoming the worst thing he has done," she said. "But I cannot help him do that by pretending he did nothing." She did not release the letter to the press. She sent one response through Helen. "Tell the truth under oath. Return what you took. Accept the consequences. Then we can discuss what remains of our family." Ryan never answered. During the months before trial, Emily also learned how public accusations survive after evidence begins correcting them. Some viewers watched only the gala clip and continued calling her a thief. Others treated Eleanor as a helpless mother being controlled by a younger woman. Marcus advised Emily not to answer every stranger. Instead, she released one carefully reviewed statement explaining that the disputes would be resolved through evidence and lawful proceedings. She kept medical appointments, attended a support group for spouses experiencing coercive control, and documented every financial interruption. Ryan canceled one credit card, delayed reimbursement for prenatal care, and instructed household staff not to release Emily's belongings. The family court addressed those issues through temporary financial orders and supervised retrieval of personal property. Each small ruling lacked the drama of a viral confrontation, yet together they restored ordinary necessities: access to clothing, medical insurance, personal records, and money for daily life. Emily began to understand that legal protection often arrives not as one magnificent victory, but as a series of practical boundaries that allow a frightened person to breathe again. By the time the consolidated civil trial began, nearly 2 years had passed since the gala. The criminal investigation remained pending, and the judge instructed the jury not to speculate about possible charges. Their responsibility was limited to the civil claims and the evidence admitted in court. Eleanor entered the Santa Barbara courtroom using the same cane she had carried at the gala. Emily walked beside her, not because Eleanor lacked capacity, but because courthouse floors were polished and unforgiving. Ryan sat with separate counsel from Whitmore Hospitality. Thomas Vale was no longer employed by the company and had become a cooperating witness in the government investigation. His civil testimony would be limited by rulings made outside the jury's presence. Helen addressed Eleanor's claims first. "This case is not about an old woman who failed to understand modern finance," she said. "It is about a sophisticated businesswoman whose son assumed age had made her easier to erase. You will hear from her doctors, her advisors, the lender, and the people who handled her property. You will see that Mrs. Whitmore asked questions, refused a transfer, and was then described as confused because her answer was inconvenient." Marcus followed for Emily. "You will also hear how a wife was accused of theft before hundreds of witnesses using a bank record created inside her husband's company. Defamation does not become responsible leadership because it is delivered from a stage." Ryan's attorney urged jurors to separate mistakes from malice. The company's attorney argued that rogue employees had violated policy and concealed their actions. The first week focused on records. A digital forensic expert explained how the gala presentation was created and transmitted. A bank investigator described the account opened in Emily's name and the device data connecting it to a Whitmore security employee. A document examiner showed the copied signature on the collateral certification. The private lender's representative admitted that the approval process had failed. Each witness was cross-examined. Some conceded weaknesses. The bank could not identify who physically held the prepaid phone at every moment. The forensic expert could show which user account transmitted a file, but not whose fingers touched the keyboard. The document examiner could prove the signature image was copied, but could not identify who pasted it. The case did not depend on one perfect clue. It depended on the pattern linking them. Eleanor's neurologist testified next. "Does Mrs. Whitmore have medical limitations?" Helen asked. "Yes. She has reduced balance, occasional word-finding difficulty when tired, and cardiovascular risk factors requiring monitoring. Do those limitations prevent her from understanding the nature and consequences of her financial decisions?" "In my examinations, no." Ryan's lawyer asked whether capacity can change over time. "Yes." "Could Mrs. Whitmore be mistaken?" "Every competent adult can be mistaken." "Could she be influenced by someone she trusts?" "Every competent adult can be influenced." Influence is not the same as incapacity. The answer ended the effort to transform normal human vulnerability into legal erasure. Eleanor then took the stand. Helen led her through the company's history, her role after Charles died, the trust, and Ryan's request for voting control. "Why did you refuse?" Helen asked. "Because he would not tell me why the company needed urgent bridge financing." "Did you authorize the Whitmore Star as collateral?" "No." "Did you create a bank account for Emily?" "No." "Did Emily take your brooch?" "No." Ryan's attorney approached for cross-examination. "Mrs. Whitmore, you love your daughter-in-law." "Yes." "You were angry with your son." "I was." "You wanted to protect Emily." "I still do." "So your testimony is not neutral." Eleanor considered him carefully. A mother is rarely neutral about her child. "That is why I spent so long hoping Ryan would tell the truth before strangers had to decide it." The attorney showed her a message in which she had written that she felt exhausted and could not remember where she placed a medical form. "You sometimes forget things. I am 74. Yesterday, I forgot where I put my glasses while I was wearing them." Several jurors smiled. "Then how can you be certain about a meeting almost 3 years ago?" "Because I took notes, made a recording in plain view, told my lawyer, and refused the same document twice." Helen later played the formal meeting recording after establishing when and how it was made. Jurors heard Ryan propose the proxy. They heard Eleanor ask about the loan. They heard him avoid answering. Finally, they heard him say, "If she refuses, we prove she cannot manage her own affairs." Ryan stared at the table. Emily testified the next day. She described receiving access to Eleanor's residence for medical emergencies, never opening the jewelry safe, and learning about the false account from a screen in front of 600 guests. Marcus asked why the accusation had been especially effective. Because Ryan had spent months telling me I remembered things incorrectly, Emily said. When he showed the account, I did not only fear that everyone believed him. For a few seconds, I wondered whether there was something wrong with me. Was there? No. There was something wrong with what had been done to me. The police officers who responded to the gala testified that they had not found probable cause to arrest Emily that night. The jury was instructed that this did not prove her civil claims, but it contradicted Ryan's public suggestion that police had confirmed the theft. Then Thomas Vale entered the courtroom. He had agreed to testify under terms negotiated separately with prosecutors. The judge allowed questions relevant to the civil case and instructed jurors not to infer guilt from matters they were not permitted to hear. Thomas admitted directing employees to create the false account and presentation slide. Who instructed you? Helen asked. Ryan Whitmore. Ryan's attorney objected, but Thomas's testimony concerned a direct instruction he claimed to have received, and the court allowed the answer subject to cross-examination. Thomas produced messages, meeting notes, and a voicemail preserved from Ryan's phone number. In the voicemail, Ryan said, "Mother will look confused. Emily will look guilty. By Monday, the board will beg me to take control." The defense attacked Thomas's motive. He was cooperating to protect himself. He had lied to auditors. He had approved false records. All true, Thomas said. So the jury should trust a confessed liar? No, Thomas replied. They should trust the records I was too frightened to destroy. The company's outside investigators then confirmed that those records matched server backups and independent financial data. Ryan chose to testify. He admitted using Eleanor's brooch as collateral, but claimed she had verbally approved it. He admitted approving the gala slide, but said Thomas had assured him it was accurate. He denied intending to frame Emily. Marcus approached him on cross-examination. You told the audience only 3 people had access to the safe? Yes. You knew you had removed the brooch? I believed I had authority. But you allowed the audience to believe it had been stolen after you removed it. Ryan paused. I believed Emily was involved in broader financial misconduct. Based on the account your own chief financial officer created, I did not know it was false. Marcus displayed the rehearsal email. Keep the slide. It gives the accusation weight. Those are your words. Yes. You wanted weight, not verification. Ryan's attorney objected that the statement was argumentative. Sustained, the judge said. Marcus rephrased. What verification did you request before publicly accusing your pregnant wife of theft? Ryan named no person and no document. For the first time since the gala, silence belonged to him. Closing arguments lasted one morning. Helen reminded jurors that financial elder abuse does not always begin with a stranger's telephone call. Sometimes it begins with a trusted relative who decides affection entitles him to control. Eleanor Whitmore was not harmed because she was incapable, Helen said. She was targeted because her son believed the world would confuse age with incapacity. Marcus stood beside the empty velvet box from the gala. Ryan accused Emily of taking a jewel he had already pledged, he said. He displayed an account his own organization manufactured. He invited security before she had answered a single question. That was not an investigation. It was a performance designed to create a first impression before the truth could enter the room. The defense emphasized the burden of proof and Thomas Vale's dishonesty. Ryan's attorney argued that a reckless executive decision was not necessarily a coordinated scheme. The company's attorney asked jurors not to punish thousands of employees for the conduct of senior officers. The judge instructed the jury to consider each defendant, claim, and category of damages separately. Sympathy, anger, and media coverage were not evidence. The women had to prove their civil claims by the applicable standard, and punitive damages required the additional showing required under California law. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Emily waited in a courthouse conference room with Caroline sleeping against her shoulder. Eleanor sat by the window reading a mystery novel. How can you read? Emily asked. I have spent 2 years waiting for other people to finish speaking, Eleanor said. I am reclaiming the afternoon. When the clerk called them back, Ryan entered from the opposite hallway. The jury found that Ryan had financially abused Eleanor, converted her property, participated in fraud, and breached duties connected to the disputed assets. It found Whitmore Hospitality liable on several claims tied to acts performed by senior officers and company systems, though not on every allegation. It found that Ryan had defamed Emily and intentionally participated in the creation and publication of false financial information about her. The verdict awarded Eleanor the value of the pledged property, losses caused by the transaction, attorney's fees where authorized, and additional damages. Emily received compensation for reputational injury, emotional harm, and financial losses. In a separate punitive damages phase, the jury heard limited evidence concerning Ryan's finances and the degree of planning before returning an additional award. The judge did not order Ryan imprisoned. This was a civil case. She did not declare him criminally guilty. She entered judgment, confirmed the continuing protective orders subject to their proper proceedings, and ordered disputed trust property restored or accounted for. Then she addressed Eleanor. Mrs. Whitmore, this court's ruling does not grant you dignity. You brought that with you. It recognizes that your age did not diminish your legal voice. Eleanor lowered her head once. Outside, reporters shouted questions. Mrs. Whitmore, do you regret testifying against your son? Eleanor stopped. I regret that he made the truth feel like an act against him, she said. It was the last act of love I could offer. Emily was asked whether she wanted Ryan punished. I wanted him stopped, she replied. The rest belongs to the legal process. Months later, the district attorney announced charges arising from the false documents, pledged property, and related conduct. Ryan eventually entered a negotiated plea to financial offenses. The criminal judge imposed a sentence based on those charges and the agreement before the court. Thomas Vale also accepted responsibility under a cooperation arrangement. The civil verdict had not predetermined those outcomes. Separate investigators, prosecutors, defense lawyers, and judges handled the criminal matter under a higher burden of proof. Whitmore Hospitality survived. Independent directors removed Ryan, replaced senior financial leadership, repaid affected lenders, and adopted controls requiring direct confirmation before accepting trust assets as collateral. Employees who had objected internally were invited to speak during the outside review. Some had remained silent from fear. Others had tried to raise concerns and been ignored. Eleanor did not retake day-to-day command of the company. She chose 2 independent trustees and retained her voting rights under a revised plan. Her decisions surprised people who expected a dramatic return to the boardroom. I spent 50 years helping build hotels, she told Emily. I would like to spend the years I have left living somewhere that does not feel like a lobby. She moved into a smaller house overlooking the ocean. Charles's desk stood near the window. The Whitmore Star was recovered from the lender after the debt and ownership issues were resolved. Eleanor did not return it to a vault. On Caroline's first birthday, she fastened the brooch to a framed piece of velvet beside a handwritten note. This belonged to your great-grandfather's promise, your grandmother's memory, and the day 2 women refused to let a lie become an inheritance. Emily completed her divorce under orders addressing property, support, and parenting separately from the civil verdict. Ryan's future contact with Caroline was determined through the family court with professional evaluation and safety conditions. Emily did not make those private details part of her public victory. She returned to work as an architectural preservation consultant and helped convert one of the company's oldest hotels into affordable apartments for retired hospitality workers. Eleanor funded a legal clinic inside the building for older adults facing coercion, forged documents, or misuse of trust assets. The clinic's first director asked Eleanor what name should appear above the entrance. Not Whitmore, Eleanor said. They named it the Clear Voice Center. On opening day, a 68-year-old man arrived carrying a folder of papers his nephew had pressured him to sign. A widow came with unexplained withdrawals from an account shared with her caregiver. A retired teacher asked whether needing help with technology meant she had lost the right to control her money. Eleanor greeted each person herself. Emily watched from across the room with Caroline in her arms. The child reached toward the sapphire brooch Eleanor wore for the first time since the gala. Careful, Emily said. Eleanor smiled. Let her touch it. Jewelry should not be more protected than people. That evening, 3 generations sat on the porch while the Pacific turned gold. Ryan's name did not enter the conversation. Eleanor understood that forgiveness, if it ever came, would not mean returning power to someone who had abused it. Emily understood that leaving a marriage did not mean losing the family members who had chosen truth. Caroline understood only that she was safe between two women who laughed when the wind lifted the birthday ribbon from her hair. The most valuable inheritance was never the hotel company or the sapphire. It was the right to trust your own memory. It was the courage to challenge a familiar voice when it demanded silence. And it was the wisdom to know that protecting a family name is meaningless if protecting it requires sacrificing the people who carry it. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs the reminder that age does not erase authority and love does not require obedience. Subscribe for more stories where courage enters the room before justice. And tell us below, would you have believed Emily, Eleanor, or the powerful man holding the microphone?